Stay tuned if you want to find out what I thought the best Super Nintendo games of all time were, cause here they come right now. Yo brothers, you're at home with a geek. I'm Mark, aka the Little Black Dude. Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching one of my videos and you love movies, TV, and comic books, all the nerdy geeky stuff you can find, make sure you mash the subscribe button and ring my bell so that you can be part of the Nerdification Squad and know whenever a new video comes out. This time, we're talking about Super Nintendo games, my favorite Super Nintendo games of all time. Picture it, New Jersey, 1991. The last decade of the 20th century was in full effect. Everyone was claiming doing things in a new way solely due to the fact that the 90s were upon us. But I, like many of you, was a kid. I was 10 years old at the time. The only things that were on my mind were school, cartoons, and video games. This year in particular, though, was special since it was when America got one of the most influential game systems in history. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System! Or the SNES, or Super Nintendo, depending on who you asked. Its library of games was varied, and had some amazing experiences, interspersed with some not-so-great experiences, but there was something for every kid on the system. This is my list of Super NES games that I loved. The year the Super Nintendo came out, there was not a single person that did not play or have this game, Super Mario World. It was the launch title for this game system. Back when Nintendo always had to put a Mario title out with every game system they put out. It took the franchise to the next level, because at the time, the last Super Mario Bros. Game that most people had played was Super Mario 3, which was amazing. It took everything Super Mario 3 did well, and then just accelerated it. Additionally, we had new ways to play, because of Yoshi. Not only was there the green Yoshi that we saw on the package there were three others with three different types of abilities. Being able to breathe fire, stomping the ground and slamming things, and being able to fly. Those were things that just expanded the game that much further. And it was a great game to play, because it was challenging, but it wasn't impossible. It definitely did separate the real gamers from those who were just casual, because some of the things that you had to be able to accomplish in this game took some real skill. But anybody could pick up Super Mario World and play it and have a great time. The Super Nintendo was where I discovered RPGs as well, and this game was the one that made me fall in love with Chrono Trigger. It was the first video game I ever beat on my own, and when I saw the ending I was like, this is amazing, I love every minute of this. It was one of my favorite games growing up. Then a few days after I had beaten it, I found out in a magazine that there were 9 total endings in the Super NES version, and I said to myself, I have to see them all, so I've been playing over and over and over again to try and see every single ending. I loved this game so much because I was getting into anime at the time as well, and I found out that the character designs for this game had been done by Akira Toriyama, who we all know is the creator of Dragon Ball. Yeah, mixing video games on my favorite system with someone whose animation I absolutely loved, yeah, that was a total recipe for a winning game for me. Next on the list is Super Mario Kart. This was a first of its kind game, because none of us thought that this was going to spawn 7 sequels. 8 if you want to count Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The tracks were what really made the biggest difference, because playing this game already was interesting, but the amazing amount of difference between each of the tracks, like for example, all of the raceways, Mario Raceway, Royal Road, if you wanted to talk about Choco Hills and Rainbow Road, things like that, all of these tracks were amazing, so much so that copies of them from different versions are in all of the later versions of Mario Kart. They were amazing to play. And it was the first time that instead of the cars being the characters, we were actually racing with familiar characters from a set of games that we had already played. This game was fun and it was challenging. There was so much to it that we could not begin to understand how iconic it was when it came out in the early 90s. It's an amazing game, and I don't think anybody has ever played it that didn't at least enjoy some aspect. The first game that I ever played that mashed my love of video games and my love of comic books together was Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. I first rented this game from West Coast Video. That's how long ago this was. And every bit of it just made me excited. It was the first time I had played a Spider-Man game that I really enjoyed as well. First of all, you could play both as Spider-Man or as Venom, so that gave you two different ways to play. They were similar, but they were different enough that there was advantages to one over the other, depending on your playstyle. Secondly, this was one of the few games on the Super Nintendo that had amazing music. The sound chip for the Super NES was a lot better than the one for the Sega Genesis, of course, but it was the first game that I remember playing on the Super Nintendo where music sounded like music and didn't sound like chiptunes. It was an amazing set of music for a game. It was all done by the metal band Green Jelly. These guys were freaking awesome. Around that time, I think it was 1993, they had put out a song called Three Little Pigs, which just caught my ear because it was the Three Little Pigs story, but it was done all metal style. It was great. Then, of course, the fact that not only was Carnage, the titular villain, but the boss battles were all with classic Spider-Man villains. So you weren't just running around, chasing after symbiotes. You were also dealing with, like, the Vulture, Hobgoblin, Electro, Shocker. All those guys were still in there as well. Fun game to play. I killed my time so much with it. Definitely recommend it if you ever get the chance to play it on the Super Nintendo. Like I mentioned earlier, RPGs were a big deal for me for the Super Nintendo, and Square was constantly taking my money. In addition to Chrono Trigger, there was a game called The Secret of Mana that I absolutely loved playing on this system. It was actually the first action RPG I ever played, and it inspired me to play a game that is later on this list. Stick around to find out what that one is. But it was another excellent Squaresoft title. Squaresoft honestly ruled the Super NES in America, although they weren't doing as well in Japan from what I understand as, say, Enix was, but they were really doing their thing, because any game that Squaresoft put out, it seemed like was a million seller right off the bat. They actually had used the engine from this game to make another game, the first American-produced Squaresoft game, if I'm not mistaken, called Secret of Evermore, which wasn't great, but wasn't bad either. But Square was really doing their thing, and they ruled so hard when it came to Super Nintendo games. Another company that constantly took my money was Capcom. Anybody who knows me knows how much I loved Capcom's games. For example, when I talked about my retro arcade games, mash the card in the corner if you haven't seen that video by the way, I talked about fighting games. For example, Street Fighter 2. That was Capcom's big moneymaker. I loved every minute of that game. But they were also responsible for two series that I loved to death. Mega Man and Mega Man X. The Mega Man X series was the game series that I had to follow when I was a kid. When I was in the 8th grade, Mega Man X came out and I had to have it. Because I was a big fan of the classic Mega Man series. I had played almost every one of the classic games on the Nintendo. So, a game on the Super Nintendo that had been redesigned and reinvented, oh, I had to have it. It was seriously one of the best series that was ever on the Super Nintendo, if you asked me. It also demonstrated some of the capabilities that the system as well as the architecture for that system had. For example, the use of Mode 7 and the use of the C4 graphics chip in Mega Man and Mega Man X2 made this game so much better than everything that was on the market at the time. And because of Mega Man being the way that it was, replayability was a #1 hit because you could play this game however you wanted. Okay? You could choose whatever path you wanted. And because of that, they changed the levels due to the choices that you made. I loved it. It was such a great game. Then, of course, not long after that, we got Mega Man 7, which was the first classic Mega Man game that was on the Super Nintendo. It got a lot of inspiration from Mega Man X because there were graphical upgrades. The bosses, even though they still had the traditional whatever it is man names that they lost in Mega Man X, they had more of a design that looked more like the Mega Man X bosses. That was such a great concept. For example, Shade Man. You could have used him in either Mega Man 7 or Mega Man X and he would have fit right in. It was amazing. Even though Mega Man 7 was more of a niche game because it was for people who were fans of Mega Man Classic. It was still a great game to play, and I would recommend it any day of the week, even though there are some people that thought that it was kind of cheesy. A game no favorite games list should ever be without is Super Mario All-Stars, because it did something that most game series didn't do at this time. It was the first time that a series of games had gotten an upgrade and a release all together. It was a redux of Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, and the introduction of Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, which was the original Super Mario Bros. 2 from 1986. This was the first time that most Americans who didn't know anything about emulation, myself included, ever got to play this game. It made such a big difference. It's such a classic. It had the classic gameplay, so everything that you were used to doing in the old games was still very possible, with the exception of certain glitches, like for example the Minus World glitch was no longer in Super Mario Bros. But it made the older games feel like a new experience. It gave a newer generation, because I was 6 or 7 years old the first time I played Super Mario Bros. I didn't have a Nintendo in the house until I was about 8, but friends of mine had them, so I had played the games a couple of times. But it made these old games feel like it was a brand new thing. And at the time I was about 13 years old, so other kids that were my age when I first started playing that game were just now getting that experience that NES players had gotten back in the past. And this is where I started really loving retro games. This is what made me want to stick around and find out what other games were out there. And it kindled stuff like what I'm doing now with At Home with the Geek. Playing Secret of Mana back in the day really sparked my interest in other action RPGs. And of course, I had to give this game a try because of it. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This was the first Zelda game I ever played because I never played Legend of Zelda or Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, on the NES, nor did I play Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. I had no experience with Zelda before this game, and I loved every bit of it. Even from its earliest roots, it was a classic. The way that things were handled, the kinds of magic you had available to you, the different levels of difficulty you were going through each of the dungeons. It made such a wave in the way that people saw video games, and it definitely inspired so much stuff out of the later Zelda series. The gameplay from this game inspired the way that games like, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask and even some aspects of Skyward Sword are coming straight from A Link to the Past. I can't say anything else but that's better about this. It's an amazing game. And if you ever get the chance, please play the Super NES version. It is also available for the Game Boy Advance, and if I'm not mistaken, it is in the Virtual Console for the Wii, the Wii U, and for the 3DS. So if you get a chance to do so, get a hold of it, play through it, and see how much you love it, because I know I did. Finally, this game was a masterpiece. It was the best of both Nintendo and Squaresoft's capabilities mashed together. Super Mario RPG. This game did so much for me as a teenager. Playing Super Mario RPG gave me so much pleasure because it was everything that was great about Super Mario Brothers. The jumping on Goombas, the attacks with shells, having hammers available to you, being able to play as Mario, Bowser, and Peach, characters that you didn't really think you were going to play as in this game, and then combining that with the Final Fantasy type battles that I got used to from playing Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 3, well 6, but that's another issue. Loved every minute of this game. It felt like Squaresoft and Nintendo were made for each other for this game. Additionally, the references! Oh lord, the references! For example, Samus Aran is somewhere in this game. You get to talk to a character you are 100% sure is Link, and the boss Culex from Final Fantasy VI is hidden in this game. This was the best that Super Mario Brothers could have done, if you ask me, because the Super NES was a haven for RPG games. So having a Super Mario based RPG made total sense. And because of how well it did, it got a sequel that it was going to be called Super Mario RPG 2, but ended up on the Nintendo 64 as Paper Mario. Paper Mario became its own series, as well as inspiring the Mario and Luigi series RPGs that came out for the Game Boy Advance and for the Nintendo DS. I can't say anything else that would make this game more epic. If you get the chance to play Super Mario RPG, do it, because it's a great game. These were my favorite Super NES games, but there were so many classic ones that came out between the years of 1991 and say 1996 when the Nintendo 64 was coming out. But what were your favorite games? What were your least favorite games? Why don't you leave me a comment on my Facebook page and let me know what your favorite selections were. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I'm always happy to meet new people. And if you want to check out more of what I do, here's some more of my ranting, there'll be a couple videos up over here so that you can do exactly that. Until next time, this is the Little Black Dude. Stay geek and proud.